quite manfully of Jamaica's economic fate. From the fact of his federal conception, he's now the father of the newborn nation. Here comes a Norman Henry, a revolutionary man of the state. May he live long in the gift of his very best. This way to anticipate, he'll outlive the rest. And may we thankful be for what we are blessed. Roman the Manley's cabinet, sons we'll ever almost hear. Here comes a Roman Manley, a level-headed man of the state, who took the fight to take the right quite manfully of Jamaica's economic fate. From the fact of his federal conception, he's now father of the newborn nation. Here comes a Roman Henry, a revolutionary man of the state. Along through Raven's Swamp, through all our rocky strand, one Jamaican gentleman, a great statesman is he, and he scored as he bore this throughout the land to enjoy prosperity. He must federate and be. Here comes a Roman Manley, a level-headed man of the state, who took the fight to take the right quite manfully of Jamaica's economic fate. From the fact of his federal conception, he's now the father of the newborn nation. Here comes a Roman Henry, a revolutionary man of the state. May he live long in the gift of his very best. This way to anticipate, he'll outlive the rest. And may we thankful be for what we are blessed. Roman, here comes a Roman Henry, Jamaican gentleman, a great statesman is he, and his cause as he pours throughout the land to enjoy prosperity. We must federate and be. Here comes a Lord Manley, a level-headed man of the state, who took the fight to take the right quite manfully of Jamaica's economic fate. From the fact of his parallel conception, he's now the father of the newborn nation. Here comes a Northern Manley, a level-headed man of the state. May he live long and give of his very best. This we do anticipate. He'll live for the rest, and may we thankful be for what we are blessed. Roland Manley's cabinet, sons we'll ever almost hear. Here comes a Roland Manley, a level-headed man of the state, who took the fight to take the right.
On behalf of the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network and the Norman Washington Manley Foundation, with whom we have partnered to host this symposium, let me warmly welcome everyone to this space. And that includes basically not just those here, but those who are online. And I also need to include those who will be watching at another time. We're all united in time and space through technology. Now, one of the main undertakings of the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network is the hosting of public conversations relevant to the mission of the church within the region. And this exercise today, even though it's somewhat unique for us, but it follows the broad intention in terms of the tremendous relevance that current geopolitical developments impacting significantly upon Caribbean sovereignty have upon our people and our people's sense of security, our tentative unity, and our efforts in plotting a path of common freedom and flourishing for all our peoples. So we grasped the opportunity to partner with the Norman Manley Foundation to occasion public reflection on those concerns on this auspicious occasion of the birthday of our hero, national hero, Right Excellent Norman Manley, and of course also the birthday of the Caribbean community, which actually started its charter on this day with the signing of the Treaty of Chaguaramas on the 4th of July, 1973. And it was in honor of Norman Manley's contribution and his pioneering the Caribbean integration project. So I acknowledge gratefully all who are here, and we're all, I believe, united in purpose, and that will include detractors. We all have a job to do, and today that is to reflect upon Mr. Manley. Our theme, Norman Manley the Federalist, the Caribbean in Crisis, revisits the dream. Now, the federal dream never died, but let me quickly say for those of the younger generation unfamiliar with what that is, and I do know that there are many who, when they hear of federation, they don't know what that is. So Jamaica got independence in '62, and we have the list of other Caribbean Anglophone countries which had their independence after that, going right up to 1983, I think, with Antigua, 1981, with Antigua and Barbuda. And I think it was St. Kitts and Nevis in 1983. But all of these small island states getting independence was never actually the plan. That was Plan B. Plan A was the Federation. And the original plan, this federation, or the Federated States of the Caribbean, we called it the West Indies then, under one president. And initially every single island, without exception, wanted that. That was the dream. And we love to repeat negative narratives that it was Jamaica's fault, because of course we are the ones that voted it down, but we are also the ones that pioneered the dream. Norman Washington Manley was the chief champion of Caribbean integration and West Indies Federation. And we need to guard against demonizing and finger pointing. So we're gathered here today to reflect upon that moment in history. The West Indies Federation actually lasted about 3 or 4 years. And we want to, because of what is happening now in the Caribbean, look back on our history and examine it for, resonances. Are there things that we should be reflecting on at this time when our sovereign survival for many, it's apparently an issue that we need to focus on? We can't take it for granted. So we're here together, we're in this space, and I would like to welcome each person to the first session that we'll be having. And we'll be focusing with our theme, of course, Norman Manley, the Federalist, the Caribbean in Crisis, revisits the dream. So we're going to start at Norman Manley, the Federalist. And there is, before we start, I think especially with the sense of, we started a bit late, so I think I would like to start us off on a moment of inspiration. So before I introduce our first presenter, who happens to be a prof. It was another prof about 20 years ago that I listened to him speaking from a podium like this one in a New Kingston ballroom. And whether that prof stands for professor or for prophet, I can't say, because sometimes you never know. But when this prof spoke, I was moved to my soul. And when the Spirit comes upon me, I'm a Pentecostal from that background, so when the Spirit comes upon me, songs come to me. And when this prof spoke, this song started singing in my head, and I recorded it later. And it inspired me deeply, and I would like to, with your permission, share it with you with the hope that it will also inspire you. And so we will, I'm seeing that this is not on. Okay, well, we'll play the song, One People.
In the fire of one struggle for freedom, to stand and be one power, charging our own destiny. We are uniting by one vision, pressing ahead in our one mission, mission to bring to fulfillment our one true desire, the grand goal of our history. One love, one song, one sea, our sacred Caribbean sea. Here we are. Oh, how the waves of our cultures have washed us together and knitted our hearts in this hour to see the beauty of mountains and plains in our lands, all crowned by the bright golden sands of Caribbean Sea. Now we know what our ancestors have told us. Their dreams now uphold us, for here we stand, every race and religion of man, now joining hands across these islands in deep blue Caribbean Sea. We are one people, forged in the fire of one struggle for freedom. You stand and be one power, charting our own destiny. We are united by one vision, Christ in the head in our one mission, to bring to fulfillment our one true desire, the grand goal of our story. One love, one song, one sea, our sacred Caribbean sea. We have come from myriad positions and places, but now we embrace this omniscient plan that now seizes our souls, and faith in our age and our lands to unfold, from dazzling difference to merge as a strong family. We are right, recognizing collectively strength is in unity. We will survive not because of our size, but our determination to strive for the best that is common to man in the isles of this land. We are one people, forged in the fire of one struggle for freedom. To stand and be one power, charting our own destiny. We are united by one vision, pressing ahead in our one mission, to bring to fulfillment our one true desire, the grand goal of our story. One love, one song, one sea, our sacred Caribbean sea.
This prophet, or I should say prof, was actually Professor Kenneth Hall, who shortly after that became our Governor General. And I thank him for the inspiration to write that song. But the professor that I will now bring to your attention, who I'll be introducing most informally. We'll properly introduce him later when he joins our other panel discussions. But Prof. Trevor Monroe is in fact quite known for his firebrand way of speaking truth to power. So I'll introduce him as professor, and in fact, some may claim that his professions over the years have fundamentally changed. But what has been consistent has been that firebrand capacity and fearless and courageous spirit in challenging corruption and oppression at its core. One of Jamaica's most brilliant sons. Let me welcome to share with us his recollections of Norman Manley, the Federalist. Professor Trevor Monroe, please welcome him.
As you can imagine, I've been called many things in my life, but never a prophet. So I thank you for making the correction, Yakengele, as a professor. Ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, those of you who are here present, as well as those who are online and who shall join us later, let me first thank the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network and Yakengele in particular for inviting me, as well as the Norman Manley Foundation for extending the invitation to take part in this symposium. I also want to thank you for being so brief in my introduction, Yakengele. It didn't take away any of my time. Sometimes these introductions are longer than the presentation, so I'm happy you didn't fall into that trap. The title, however, which I've been asked to comment on, Recollections and Reflections on Norman Manley, the Federalist, may be somewhat misleading. My recollections of Norman Washington Manley relate to Norman Manley, less so the Federalist, as the architect of Jamaica's national movement for independence. And more explicitly, my recollections relate to two encounters, which I take the privilege of mentioning as they stick in my mind, and as you mentioned the term firebrand, it reminds me of the first encounter when I was a student at the University of the West Indies, I believe about 19, 20 years old, and I was a research student for the Young Socialist League, which was attached to the People's National Party and wanted to ensure that the policy of the party was sufficiently left. So it was November the 15th, 1964, that a special conference was called at Excelsior School in order to discuss the new policy framework being proposed by the party and by the party's policy committee. Norman Manley was very, very concerned after the 1962 election and the loss to renew the partnership, partly, both in terms of leadership as well as policy. And the Young Socialist League as part of the left, and we felt that that policy was not sufficiently radical. It wasn't sufficiently radical, particularly in the area of land reform, in ensuring that the masses of Jamaican people who had been so long deprived of land were able to access it and to utilize it. The right wing in the party was, of course, very strong, and Norman Manley, as was his custom, was trying to balance, to ensure that he retained the unity which was lost when the party split and the left was moved out of the party in 1952. But we, the young radicals, on reflection, were really pushing too far, trying to get too far too fast. And of course, the right wing in the party at that conference was very determined that we were not going to get our way. And therefore the conference developed into really a clash, almost a physical clash. And my first, therefore, encounter with Norman Manley was when, at a certain point, having denounced the right wing as being too right wing, it was then our turn. So he got up on a platform, I recall him pulling his coat back and saying, "Who do you young whippersnappers think you are?" First and the last time I've heard that term, but I'll never forget it. Who do you whippersnappers think you are? You underrate and don't appreciate the struggles and the efforts that we made to bring Jamaica where it was then. And on reflection, he was correct. We insufficiently understood, appreciated the efforts that were made to bring us to where we were at that point. My second recalled encounter was more distant. In 1967, I checked the dates, between September 18th and 22, I actually wrote 5 full-length articles published in the Daily Gleaner. And the articles were on the early nationalist movement. And again, our radical spirit or determination to see transformation and change led us to be overly critical of the PNP. I recall characterizing them as a middle-class movement, insufficiently appreciative, insufficiently taking into account both the membership as well as the interests of the working class. Norman Manley was very upset at this and felt that we were, again, underrating the struggles that we were inheriting in terms of an independent Jamaica. So it is against the background of those 2 encounters that I really develop a very, very much higher regard for Norman Washington Manley, when, despite those clashes, despite his disappointment, and despite his reservations about me, he agreed for me to have 2 personal full-time interviews with him on July the 25th, 1968, and September the 5th, 1968. And in those 2 interviews, which were done primarily for my doctoral thesis, which I was writing at the time for Oxford University, he was mainly speaking and I was interviewing him as Norman Manley, the architect of Jamaica's decolonization. The title of my thesis was The Politics of Constitutional Decolonization. But on reflection, I note that the interviews took place at a time 2 weeks after the People's National Party celebrated Norman Manley's 75th birthday. And at the point of that celebration, he announced that he would not be standing for re-election as the party's president, that he would demit office in February 1969. So it was a moment of very sober reflection for him and a degree of celebration of his 75th, but also disappointment. It was also just 6 weeks before the October 19th, 1968 upsurge, riot it is called, the Rodney riots, when the extent of the inequalities in Jamaica and the extent to which the blacks were being deprived of participation in the economic development reflected itself in the government of the day being discontented with the Professor Walter Rodney, as he became later, Dr. Walter Rodney, his work going into the inner city and bringing the people to an awareness of blackness and also to be proud of their heritage. So it was a time when upsurge was imminent. And also a year before Norman Manley also actually passed. So, in that conversation, even though it wasn't focused on Norman Manley, the Federalist, it was quite clear that he was not only the architect of Jamaica's decolonization project, but he was also the Caribbean's most consistent advocate for federation. That advocacy first represented itself in the People's National Party Conference of 1944, where a resolution was proposed and accepted in favor of British West Indies Federation. Consistently thereafter, Norman Manley took the stand that federation was the way to go. In 1945, the resolution of the Caribbean Labour Congress held in Barbados, carried there by Richard Hart on behalf of Norman Manley, again proposed federation. 1947, the very important Caribbean Labour Congress conference in Jamaica reaffirmed the commitment to federation with constitutional advance, both for the territories as well as for the federal center toward dominion status. It was in September 1947 at that Montego Bay conference, in his continued advocacy for federation, that Norman Manley made a statement which I want to quote as one still relevant today. He said, quotes, "If we won't leave our little boat and get into the larger vessel which is able to carry us to the goal of our ambitions, then we are doomed, and history will condemn us." If we don't get into the larger vessel to carry us to our goal of our ambitions, then we are doomed and history will condemn us. That statement was maintained consistently by Norman Manley throughout his career. However, please note the exact words. Federation was to carry us to the goal of our ambitions. What would be the case if at a certain point it did not appear, either to him or to the leadership, that it wasn't carrying us to the goal of our ambitions? So I disaggregate two elements of that statement. One, independence from colonial rule for Jamaica and the British West Indies. These were twinned and would go together. Two, economic and social development for Jamaica and the Caribbean would also go together as twins. To the extent that events clashed for Jamaica's independence, Jamaica's socio-economic development, I dare say my understanding is that Norman Manley would privilege Jamaica's decolonization. It is important for us to remember that seeing federation as a vessel for our independence consistently meant opposition to the colonial office's vision. Because the vision of the colonial office across the colonial empire was that federating the colonies, whether in Central Africa, East Africa, Asia, was a means of reducing the extraordinary expense of administering them separately, and also a method of becoming, as they would see it, a more efficient colonial system. From 1947 to 1961, in all the conferences that took place that Manley attended, and there were many, both in the region, but more so by the colonial office, he said and meant, repeated and stood up, that all the British colonies and Jamaica needed to be federated as independent dominions, not as the colonial office would see it and had planned it, as a means of administrative efficiency and economic sustainability, that is, for the colonial office. So that's the first issue in relation to the perception of an independent federation rather than a federation to facilitate continued colonial administration. In relation to socio-economic development, Norman Manley, the Federalist, modified his views in accordance with his concept of Jamaica's socio-economic needs and in relation to, in his own words, the need to fight anti-federal sentiment. in Jamaica. And let us recall that that sentiment was embryonic, but it was always there. It reflected itself in the words of Alexander Bustamante, then the chief minister. Manley was not even in the House of Representatives at the Montego Bay Conference. Bustamante said at that time, "How can the walking and the creeping and the babe who has not begun to creep yet, unlike, how could they walk on the same avenue?" I have never heard that, Bustamante continued. I have never heard that in joining with bankrupts, we can become successfully prosperous. And that embryonic sentiment developed later meant that between 1947 and 1955, in particular, a strong federal center was seen by Manley and the PNP as critical to cement Jamaica's and the region's development. However, 1957, Jamaica's economic growth began to take off. Bauxite mining, tourism, industrialization by invitation accelerated Jamaica's development, and therefore created the issue of ensuring that that development would not be hampered or frustrated by engagement in the Federation. So that following the Norman Manley victory and the PNP's victory in 1959, Jamaica's economic development, its beginning of the boom, began to take center stage. So much so that in the first federal election, the first elections to the federal parliament in 1958, Norman Manley, who all expected to be a candidate as the leading advocate for federation, he declined to stand for election to the federal parliament and indicated that he had to stay in Jamaica for two reasons: to protect and to guide Jamaica's continued accelerating socioeconomic development, but secondly, to fight against anti-federal sentiment that was growing in Jamaica in the person of Bustamante and his immediate followers. So he felt that going to the federal center would reduce his presence and therefore his capacity to resist that anti-federal sentiment. Both socioeconomic boom and the fight against anti-federal sentiment led to a shift in the PNP and Norman Manley's stance from a strong federal center to one that would be incapable of intervening in any negative way, most of all by taxation, in Jamaica's economic development. Norman had previously been a part of the process which proposed a central and strong federation. So the price was heavy to stay, propose a weak center, and stronger representation in the federal parliament. Again, the Jamaican anti-federal opportunism was saying, look, we're much bigger than them. We need more space, we need more talk in the parliament. But moving to those two positions, a heavy price was paid by Norman Washington Manley. First of all, it fractured a very important relationship between himself, Eric Williams, and Grantley Adams. relationship amongst the leading advocates. And secondly, federation then became portrayed implicitly, not as an essential means of Jamaica's development, but as a potential threat, a potential break against which Jamaica had to protect itself. This leads me to look at what I call the final chapter of Norman Washington Manley, the Federalist. 1960, May 30, the day when the by-elections for St. Thomas to the federal parliament, the candidates were to be to sign up as such. Bustamante declared that the Jamaica Labour Party and the Democratic Labour Party, which was the federal counterpart, would not contest that St. Thomas by-election. Of course, he gave all the reasons that became even more familiar, that this federation was not really going to advance us, it was going to restrain us. But underlying that declaration of hostility to federation was the fact that the Jamaica Labour Party was out of funds. This has become more evident, in fact, some of their own publications at the time, that they, at that time in 1960, they had lost the 1955 elections, Jamaica Labour Party, and lost the 1959 general elections. They had lost the parish council elections afterwards, and the party was literally looking around for a means of survival. And that means of survival was seen to be become the champion of Jamaica against these poor islands who would be sucking us. That same morning, within 1 hour, and in my interview, Norman Manley confirmed this. Once he saw that report in the Gleaner, he decided then and there would have to be a referendum to decide the matter. Only this morning, I believe you sent out a YouTube interview with Rachel. I am learning from Rachel that Edna was not in support of having the referendum then and there. Rachel's YouTube interview is saying that give it some time to settle. And a very insightful comment. The people need to know more about this federation. Norman Manley did not relent. Rachel says that he was somewhat stubborn. Who am I to disagree with her granddaughter? May 1960 till May 1961, Manley did everything in his power to secure the conditions for Jamaica participation so that he would be able to say that we're going into a federation that does not threaten us, but will continue to be an avenue of advancement. That meant that he also spoke to the British, and the records confirm that the British government agreed that if Jamaica did not get the conditions that it felt appropriate, it would be open to secede. They would not put in the path of Jamaica secession from the Federation and towards independence. August 3, 1961, fateful night. It is then that Norman Manley announced the date of the referendum was September 19, 1961. The People's National Party leadership was divided almost irreversibly on this. His first vice president, I read in Squee Bertram's very good book, was almost as reserved on federation, if not anti-federation, as Bustamante was. So, with the PNP's leadership not going out into the field in the way that they would have done in the 1959 elections, with federation for the first time becoming an issue of advocacy on the ground in party meetings, as distinct from an issue on which the elite agreed. Edna's diary records on November 18th, 1968, that in the 6 weeks, Norman Manley literally had 203 meetings, carrying that burden at his age, and traveled, quote unquote, 7,000 miles in reflecting his genuineness, his commitment to federation. However, as we all know now, September 19th registered a defeat for Norman Manley, the Federalist. In my opinion, not so much a defeat by anti-federal sentiment, but by the consequences of the masses of the people not being engaged over a period of time on the issue of federation. The consequences of not building awareness on how federation would facilitate Jamaica's advancement, socioeconomic, political, but specifically in raising the standard of living of the people. Because remember, as was said at the time, the gap between the haves and the have-nots was widening in Jamaica, even though economic growth was growing at record levels. So that engagement was not carried out over the period of time, and I say this, that even in respect of Jamaica's decolonization as an independent country, there was not systematic engagement of the people between 1944 and 61, 62. However, what the People's National Party did in relation to the self-government drive, they didn't do in relation to federation. And that was in the 1941-42, they called a special conference to discuss nothing else but why Jamaica needed to move from colonial status, which the British government was still saying, look, you can have universal adult suffrage, but no responsible government, no ministers. And the PNP convened a conference to inform, to educate, to arm its main members how to deal with that particular position. That wasn't done, as far as I'm aware, in relation to federation between 1947, even 1944, when it was a part of the party's manifesto, and it only became an issue for the people 1958 and later on in the referendum. So I say that the people were vulnerable to the propaganda of federation as a threat. But the turnout reflected that the federal idea and the federation in Jamaica was defeated not so much by anti-federal sentiment as by the absence of mass commitment, abstention. And I refresh myself on the numbers. The federal turnout was 61.6% of the electorate. for that referendum, lower than 1949 general election, lower than 1955 general election, lower than 1959 general election, and the subsequent election in 1962. The JLP got only 30,000 votes more for the no vote, no federation, than the very low polls that it scored when it lost the election in 1959. And very importantly, my sisters and brothers, the PNP got almost 100,000 less people voting yes for federation than they got in an election 2 years before, in 1959. The abstention was 304,000 Jamaicans, larger than the no federation, which was 256,000, and by far larger than the yes, which is 217,000. So thereafter, the rest is history. Manley felt obliged to go to London, and the process of independence constitution making begun. A process which, in my opinion, reflected one of the main weaknesses of the politics of the time: insufficient consultation, engagement with the general election. So, my main takeaway, which I believe of general relevance, is that for democracy to function in the public interest, then and even more so now, to reduce people's vulnerability to populist appeals and reduce their vulnerability to apathy, the two enemies, populism and apathy. Consultation between leaders and led, public awareness building, citizen education is critical. The PNP was lacking in that regard in relation to the Federation and the federal movement, and Norman Manley, the Federalist, paid that price, from which he really never fully recovered, particularly after the loss in 1962 with the independence election. So I thank you for the opportunity to make these few observations on Norman Manley, the Federalist. We uphold him, we regard him, we admire him for the effort, intellectual, physical, spiritual, that he put into bringing us all together. And it is for us now to apply whatever lessons can be learned to deal with a time and a complexity far greater than in 1950s and 60s, and requiring far more from us, the citizenry, and from our leadership than was required then. Thank you very much.
When Jamaica's most brilliant mind can only whet your appetite in the time allotted, it means to say that the conceptualizers just don't have a clue of how much time is really merited to deal with these subjects. So first of all, let me just say thank you, Professor Monroe, for just starting to scratch an itch, which is an enormous one. I need to, for those persons who recognize that they want to go deeper, we have Scree's book, Scree Bertram, Norman N.W. Manley, Making of a New Jamaica, available at the book table right here. So there's a chapter in it on federation. In fact, if World Cup never did go on, I think we would have just basically read that book, that whole chapter, and we would have started at 8:30. It would have been worth the while. But we have structured our, by the way, could we put the QRC code on screen and online? Those of you who don't have programs yet, you could just scan the code for your program. The activities today are planned, however poorly. We wanted to touch a bit of the past, the present, and the future. And as much as we really do need to go a lot deeper into a look at the past, we don't have any more time for that. And so from the focus on the apathy of the past, we have to now deal with the activism of the present moment, what we have to face and what we have to do now. And so the theme shifts from Norman Manley, the Federalist, to the Caribbean in crisis, because that's the present reality. And when I was speaking with Professor Lewis, who we're going to hear from in a minute, and I asked him on the first conversation, he said, I don't want to talk. I want to do something. Because I'd asked, and he specifically wanted to do something about Cuba. Cuba is on everybody's mind in the Caribbean. We don't like what are going on. And the fact is that if we don't act in the present, then what is the present moment for? And so we deliberately shifted our second session, or planned it, so that our focus on the two most outstanding areas of crisis in the Caribbean, we focus them with a view to what can we do now. This is not a time for theory and a time for highfalutin projections into the future. So these two sessions will be very much planning sessions. It will be sessions focused on what basically can be done. And the first session will focus on Cuba, and the next session focuses on Haiti. And I'm very much aware that the time is out of whack, so let's get on with it. And I'm going to welcome to the front table the two persons who will be guiding us into what can be done for Cuba. First of all, ladies first, the expert. Please welcome to the head table Her Excellency Ambassador Lopez LaRocque, and she's the ambassador for Cuba in Jamaica, and the expert on that will guide us in our concerns. A lot has been in the news at Nogoso. I had to ask the embassy to guide my mind, because a lot of the things that I was hearing, that was not quite accurate. And so we're going to welcome you, Your Excellency, to come. And we're also going to welcome to the head table Professor Rupert Lewis, from Professor Emeritus. When you are emeritus, you know that you're basically done. And I am going to leave it to them, all format, everything. We just want to have a conversation. How can we help Cuba now?
Yeah, well, since I spoke with you, I have changed my mind. Because I prefer to speak. Okay. Yeah, let me thank Trevor for his insightful lecture. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, Yakangeli, and for the efforts you have put into organizing this event and for the discussions that we have had. I'd like to acknowledge Mrs. Glynn Manley and any other member of the Manley family, those connected with the foundation. Respect to you and the family. Ambassador, glad to share the table with you. Yes, when we had the discussion, I was focusing a lot on the need for solidarity and the importance of whatever little we have. How do we share with our Cuban brothers and sisters? My connection is with the West Indian community in Havana, in Guantanamo, in Cuba, which stemmed from research that I did in Cuba in the 1970s. So for the past 20 years, I have adopted a Cuban family who I support on a monthly basis. I've also assisted people in acquiring property here in Jamaica, people who have done well with the educational system. So I feel that there is a dimension to the solidarity that we are capable of. Hundreds of students in Jamaica and throughout the Caribbean have been educated by the Cubans. Doctors with very profitable practices in Jamaica who received virtually free education. So I have a small network, it's very small. But through that little network, one of my colleagues who taught in the United States, now is retired in Jamaica, mobilized her students to send assistance to Cuban families. And one of the things they do is to the person in Havana, an academic, a professor with whom the ambassador is connected, Samuel Fourier Davis, who was her professor in Cuba. I knew Samuel over many years. So Samuel then is a professor there, but he facilitates the purchase of groceries for groups. So I think we need to think more pragmatically. And our diaspora, which I want to comment on in my presentation, because I do have a formal presentation that I want to make. The remittance, and I consider my remittance a pittance, but it's a pittance that goes to assist people with things. So that I think there needs to be initiatives at the personal level and at the level of the church, because there are church communities in Jamaica, church communities in Cuba. There needs to be, I heard Paul Burke talk about raising funds for the alternative energy supplies and so on, all of which are important. So at the time that I spoke with Yakengele, my mind was consumed with what can be done. However, what can be done takes place in a context, and therefore the pittance and the remittance takes place within a broader political framework. So I wanted to also spend some time in analyzing an aspect of that political framework which I find missing in the discussion about Cuba. So it's not about Cuba because we have the brilliant ambassador here to speak firsthand on Cuba. My thing is more a perspective, and it comes back to Norman Manley, because Norman Manley's 1968 November speech was in response to Black Power. And I want to remind you all of that relationship that he had. So let me begin, and I hope that Ekengele will allow me. Race is very much part at the center of global crises in the world today. And I want to focus single-mindedly on this factor as a critical but often continue to shape power politics. It shaped the politics that Norman Manley was involved in. When Trevor talks about self-government, Norman refers to in that November 1968 to the empowerment of the black masses. It has affected our psychology, ideologies, cultural and economic relations today. The late Jamaican philosopher Charles Mills, in his book Racial Contract, 1997, states, and I quote, "White supremacy is the unnamed political system that has made the modern world what it is today." This is not an imagined system, my friends. Mills emphasizes, quote, "We live in a world which has been foundationally shaped by the realities of European domination and the gradual consolidation of global white supremacy." We don't want any better example of global white supremacy than the Trump administration. Everybody has seen his conduct in the White House with the president of South Africa and how racist and rude he was. So that we now have before us a US president in the 250 years of the United States who is explicit and unapologetic in his racial approach. And this is not ideology, this has to do with policy. When he got out USAID, it means that people in South Africa and elsewhere who benefit from health programs, the HIV programs and so on, who benefit from other social benefits and health benefits, all of that is cut out. So race has policy implications. Today is not only the anniversary of Norman Manley, it is the 250th anniversary of American independence. The 13 colonies, British colonies, like Jamaica and Barbados, from British imperialism. Let me quote from a document written by Frederick Douglass. I consider Norman Manley, Michael Manley, ancestral figures in the same way that I consider Frederick Douglass ancestral figures, forefathers of national struggles, anti-colonial struggles. And Frederick Douglass made this speech on July 4th, 1852, quoting Psalm 137, with which every Jamaican should be familiar. "By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. And they who wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" Quote, Douglass asks a poignant question, and I quote, and this is Douglass, self-taught in terms of reading, writing, self-taught. "Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold. But while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, and authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manners of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. This question of our humanity, 1852 Douglas, and it comes up again 2026. For African Americans, for the African continent, for the diasporas. That question of our humanity constantly comes up. Edna Manley, in her artistic work, gave expression, creative expression to that humanity. You will remember, those who have seen it, her sculpture, Negro Aroused, which was a poignant statement coming out of the 1838 rebellion. However, time doesn't stand still. Imperial restrictions on political liberties were only modified in India in 1947, in China in 1949, and China was colonized by the British and by Japan. In the 1930s, that war with Japan was an anti-colonial war. And whilst people conceive of it was the Communist Party of China that led their anti-colonial revolution. The Ghana in 1957, and this was followed by the eventual independence of over 50 countries in Africa, and of course the civil rights movement in 1965 gave full voting rights to African Americans. As Trevor pointed out, our adult suffrage came in 1944. So that in all these, this is the era, that particular era, 40s, 60s, the era in which Norman Manley and the national movement, and I stress this because Jamaica had a national movement, the sense of which has been lost to subsequent generation. Why Norman Manley went out into the field and did all the work that he did, it had to do with a national strength, the national movement and the national spirit, which in that 68 speech he said was dying in Jamaica in the late 1960s. I want to shift now to the question of political community. The federal experiment was an experiment in political community, regional political community. But we all belong to several political communities. The nation is one such, but when the nation state, there are multiple ethnic communities. For example, in Trinidad, Guyana, and Suriname, ethnic identification is crucial in shaping political preferences. So, nation state, but there are multiple political communities, multiple types of identification that human beings have and develop. Another significant political community is to be found in our diasporas. And in this era, the Jamaican diaspora in Canada, the United States, Britain, are crucial repositories of political strength. When I talk to some Jamaican women who are in New York and who voted for Mamdani, you would think that you are in a non-Trump world. Because these women in their 40s, young Jamaican women who are in that area, some in businesses, some in nursing, all kinds of different activities, but full of a lot of enthusiasm and political vision. And that, in addition to the remittances, their political importance in a period when the Caribbean political movements are down and the progressive movement has been, is still yet to rebuild itself. Those are legacies that I pay a lot of attention to. The 14 parishes and the data on remittance in Jamaica. Remittances flow to all 14 parishes and in small amounts on a regular basis. It is the Caribbean diaspora in New York that reimagined modern Pan-Africanism. And if you consider Marcus Garvey's role, it was only Marcus Garvey, it was people like Domingo, who was head of the Jamaica Progressive League in New York, one of the important tributaries of the 1938 formation of the People's National Party. That Jamaican diaspora was crucial. And these people, after World War I, reimagined a different kind of global political community which Garvey was able to organize in some 40 countries. So political community is a dynamic. It's not a static thing. It can be created, but it takes a lot of effort to build political communities to achieve agendas. In that post-World War I period, Norman Manley was a combatant in the First World War, and his brother Roy tragically was killed in that war, and that was a grief that he carried with him for the rest of his life. I want to now turn to just a brief comment on technology and racism in the world today. And technology, the relationship between Elon Musk, white South Africa, and Trump is a strategic link that intends not only to exert dominance on the world, but also to colonize outer space. We have to appreciate the vision which is emerging. And in understanding the vision emerging, we also have to have our own vision for what we want for ourselves. If we don't have a defined strategic vision, then we fall prey to responding to other people's agendas. And this is really the point I want to make before concluding on Norman Manley and race and the 1968 speech. That speech was, let me just quote from Norman Manley and the speech. Norman Manley says to the party conference that he's not giving a regular speech on inventory of what was done in the last year. He says that wherever you go in Jamaica today, and indeed on the university campus, you will sooner or later hear the expression Black Power. And the entire conference burst out in applause. It is a phrase, Norman says, with deep meaning, and it arouses strong emotion. It evokes deep feelings throughout the world, and especially in America and Africa. And others here in this conference will deal with it fully. So that the conference went on to discuss this important movement. So Norman is between two movements of black people, the 38 and the 68. He goes on to say, he asks the conference, what does it mean when the Governor General is a black man? Where the Prime Minister, Hugh Shearer, is dark brown, And I myself, the leader of the opposition, am a brown man, and I'm the grandson of a black woman, and I am proud of it. I want you to just pause for a moment to understand the significance of this. The significance of this is that in the People's National Party leadership at the time, there was hostility to black power by some of the leaders. Some of the leaders shared the same view as Hugh Shearer. There was ambivalence because these are questions which the educated middle class and the brown middle class did not want to discuss. Rex Nettleford, in that book, famous book, Mirror, Mirror, provides a full discussion of what that meant. Now, one of the differences between then and now is that the progressive movement has been decimated. And we have had 30 to 40 years of neoliberalism. The consequences of that 40 years is with us. Final point, geopolitical changes have exerted a huge influence on Cuba. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the consequences then to 2026. The election of Trump, another huge geopolitical change, is those are the things that have shaped the current Caribbean crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lewis, for that context. And now we're going to be focusing on what we can do now for Cuba. Your Excellency.
So thank you very much. Good almost evening, 5 minutes soon. So we really thank you for the opportunity to share with you. And when you brought the idea to our embassy of what can be done or what you could do, I think that what you are doing today is a really important step. Just bringing the topic, just to raise voices and to discuss about it, is one of the most important issues required right now. Because as someone mentioned before, what we are facing and dealing the most is the change and the hidden metaphors in the narratives. So what is really important is to bring the topic, to discuss about it. It's been really enlightening for us as well, having the professors lecture on history. And those insights are remarkable because we are what we have brought from history. This is our roots. And definitely that defines the present and should be the beacon to the future. So we really appreciate also having the opportunity to share this from real witnesses of history. So thank you again for organizing these events. My respects to the Manley family. And in such important date, so we thank you just for bringing the topic of Cuba. I don't have an structured lecture on the topic, just as Professor has excellently presented. I will just bring some ideas for you later to think about and to come more. So, Cuba is facing, as you have already mentioned, a crisis that combines economic, energy, financial, and social challenges. However, this is not a natural crisis. These situations cannot be analyzed in isolation, must be viewed within the context of more than 6 decades of economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the United States. In particular, In particular, the severity of the current situation responds to the intensification of unilateral coercive measures applied during the last month, including restrictions on fuel supplies and extraterritorial sanctions that affect maritime transport, insurance companies, financial institutions, and international suppliers, just to mention a few. Current sanctions directly affect every aspect of our daily lives, with greatest impact on health services, education, trade, industry, causing serious harm to the population. In parallel, the impact is particularly severe in the energy sector. Restrictions on fuel imports and the age of a significant portion of the electricity generation infrastructure have caused an important disruption of the national electricity system. I will mention, just for you to have a more precise idea, some examples of this impact. As I mentioned before, Cuba is unable to purchase diesel and fuel oil required by generators, engines, and power units due to the total blockade of Cuba access to oil and its products. So our people is suffering an average of more than 20 hours of power cuts every day, which affects electricity, of course, as I mentioned. That implies daily life, cooking, access to drinking water, to health services, TV, communications, and other basic services. Life expectancy of children diagnosed with cancer has declined due to the lack of medical devices, technology, equipment, and even suitable treatment, which are beyond our reach at this point. 300 medicines from the basic health list out of the 395 produced in Cuba are in short supply due to the inability to access raw materials and pharmaceutical supplies. And containers of essential goods that have arrived in Cuba from many organizations worth of around $6.3 million have been not able to be distributed completely to their recipients due to the fuel shortages. These are just some examples. We had much more, but I wouldn't like it to make it too long for you. So it is a threat. What we are living is a threat, but not only to Cuba. It's a threat to regional peace, security, and stability. It's a threat to any sovereign state that might be subject to similar aggressive and extraterritorial measures in the future. It is an economic, media, and psychological war, the one that is being waged against our country, instigated and financed from abroad, which seeks to turn the genuine suffering of the people into a weapon against ourselves. As we all know, Cuba is a nation that embraces peace and dialogue. We believe in multilateralism, and we continue to do so. So, in this regard, what I can tell you for sure tonight is that we will continue to defend our independence, dignity, and right to develop our national project, convinced that cooperation and solidarity are more powerful tools than any mechanism of pressure or isolation. We will not ask for permission to exist, and nor will we surrender our sovereignty. So thank you very much.
Surrendering is not an option. I'm very glad to hear those words, Ambassador. So the question therefore is, since that's not an option, what is on the table? Murphy's Law. Whenever you're planning something like this and you think that you have it all in your head, then you realize that we just simply do not have enough time. But thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Professor Lewis, for guiding us in those thoughts. What I'm going to say with regards to, Ambassador, what you have said, you know, I'm not sure who is listening, whether in the room or online, with a solution. But the present moment is all about being keyed into what you can do, and we can do something. Ambassador, you mentioned the solarization. That was one of the things that when I was listening to the briefing from your attaché, the Cuban government, I think, is making sure that all of the schools in Cuba have to convert to solar energy. Obviously, as the Cubans have shown us, that when your back is against the wall, you turn your hand, make fashion, as one time we used to do in Jamaica. And we know that the Cubans are very versatile. But I am encouraging those of you with solutions to touch base with the embassy and to not take it for granted that you might not be a part of some solution that exists. So on that note, because of time's sake, I'm going to actually move ahead to Haiti. And originally the plan was to show a film, and I've already decided that that can't happen because, of course, the time will just simply not permit. So I will just say what the whole business of the film was about, and hopefully it ties into what we're talking about in terms of, you know, being a solution. It was about last year, year before last time, that I was in Guyana at the time, and there was a group in Guyana that was an activist group in support of Haiti. And I think it was from the earthquake days. They're at the University of Guyana. But again, never underestimate what groups can do when you come together and you decide to do something. So this group has been helping Haitians practically in small projects, Professor Lewis, as well as sometimes doing what you can, because one cocoa full basket. And while I was there in Ghana, they introduced me to this group in Haiti. This is a platform, a national platform of farmers. Haiti is one of the most politically organized, and I don't mean that by party. I mean civic. Every single community has some kind of I guess what we call them in Jamaica, CBOs, but everyone is attached to some kind of a civic organization. And these farmers had decided, one of the longest standing farming organizations, they call them peasant groups in Haiti, had decided to coalesce a national platform and invite all of the peasant organizations, the farming, we in Jamaica call them small farmers. So it's the small farmers all over Haiti. Haiti is divided into departments like Jamaica's into parishes. And so they came together on this one platform and were seeking to basically have a voice, find their voice. And I was asked to help facilitate one of the processes that they didn't seem to be able to get through with. So I started working with this group. And it sucked me in to the point where, I mean, I don't speak Haitian to this day. I think I'm trying to work on my vocabulary every day. But I am on the phone. I think I'm no more in Haiti than I'm in Jamaica. And one of the things that I did to assist this group was, in fact, this film is a documentary of that group, which I directed from Jamaica. I still have not been to Haiti yet. Thankfully, there is all the things that we can do in AI. And I've been working with this group. Their aim is, in 24 months, to increase their membership to 1 million members. And that's like about an eighth, I believe, of the Haitian population. So that's an ambitious goal. But I watched their spirit, core spirit. And let me explain. I was speaking with Mr. Bruce Golding, and he made a comment to me. He said, in Haiti, there are 220 political parties registered, which means that if all of the gangs were to dissipate tomorrow and they held an election, you don't know that it would work, because you could, with 250 political parties, you could probably get a majority with maybe 3% of the electorate, which would be no mandate. In other words, Haiti is one of the most fragmented places, which is an absolute marvel, because just not so long ago, Aristide won I think it was the greatest landslide in the Caribbean, much bigger than Michael. And to go from that kind of a national unity behind one leader to the place where, according to Mr. Golding, nobody in Haiti can agree that the sun sets in the west. And the one thing that all of those 220 political parties have in common is that they have sworn an oath never to agree on anything at any time, anywhere, for any reason. And within that context, me working with these farmers with no ambitions apart from just wanting to be left alone to do what they can do and feed, because Haiti's problems, like Cuba's, after a while you recognize that, listen man, they're bigger than you and I and everybody, and the name of the game is survival, and the best we can do is to align with the human intention to survive in these places. And so I thought, and every single day has become for me another lesson in the Haitian terrain. But we will be, I'm going to have to reschedule that film. We had actually an intention to show that film once a month for the next 24 months while we're working on this expansion of their membership base. And actually today, right now at this very moment, they are showing the Haitian version of that film in Haiti. And the idea was that I would be showing the English version here, and they would be showing the Creole version there. And by the way, putting together a film in 2 languages, thank God for AI, but it was still quite a challenge to execute. But I have to skip the film, but I want part of the proceedings that will go on tonight is I'm going to have a short auction, just 4 pieces. And that will be the break between, because we have a limited time. Here I gave my word with regards to when we would need to leave this space. And so I want to recalibrate and start at 7 o'clock for the evening session, which is the final for the night. And so rather than showing the film, which really was just about, it's a document of this group, how they began, and the whole historical context of Haiti. I look out in social media for the next time we show it, which will probably be next month. Can't tell you the venue yet. But I want to introduce these works of art. Some of them are coming from the farmers themselves, and some from persons in the community. And in terms of thinking of ways to raise money for the various things that we are accomplishing together, the idea came, well, we could auction art. And of course, art is the expression of that spirit that makes us continue and to survive. So let me just first of all introduce the first piece. Mr. McLennan. Okay, great. Oh, they were supposed to be veiled. And let me explain how we're going to do this auction. Again, Murphy's Law, we had intended and we will continue with different pieces. This auction online, and we're going to open up a website. There was just simply not enough time. Actually, this was to have taken place first in February, and I just happened to pick up the artwork, was it last week? No, this week. Just picked it up from DHL, and in time to hurry it up to frame art. I won't bother going into all of the details, but we're starting at $1,000 US per piece. And how we're going to execute this auction, which is going to be based upon trust, is very simple, because I'm going to ask those here who are interested in the piece to simply, first of all, you're going to have to take a number. So if you're interested in bidding, please take this number down, 220-1066. That's 876-220-1066. That's correct. So that's 876-220-1066. You also, if you're online, you may need to take this email down, lightningflashproductions@gmail.com. I'm going to ask the persons who are managing the screen to just put that on your screen, Lightning Flash. That's LIGHTN, not lightening, but lightning. lightningflashproductions@gmail.com. And if you could just put up those two things on the screen, I would appreciate it. And those who are watching online, this is how we're going to participate. The bidding starts for each of the pieces at $1,000. There will obviously be no more rounds than just the first round. The piece will go to the person who simply writes down and submits the highest bid. It's $1,000 USD. In fact, let me say that again. Yes, $1,000 USD. Right. Certainly not Jamaican. And so, I'm sorry. 3 of the pieces are for $1,000 USD. I've actually framed one of them, so that's going to actually be. I'm going to put on $100 on that one to cover that base cost. But I'm going to invite you to write down how much you are prepared to value the painting before you act. And this is painting number 1. So when you are writing in your submission, and you're going to submit it to lightningflashproductions@gmail.com, the winner will be selected actually within 24 hours. So if you are watching this late, you can get your bid in. And we will identify the highest bidder. The team here at Caribbean Christian Leadership Network will review all of them, and we'll get in touch with the winner and say the painting is yours, and give you instructions as to how to make payments. And the shipping will be on us. It's factored in. So, painting number 1, and I should have had my notes here, because each one, in fact, what I think I will do later on, there's a little write-up about the painter and the work itself, and I apologize again. It was supposed to be on the screen now, but we didn't have the opportunity. The amount of files that we had to out. But we'll invite the camera to focus on this painting number 1, and I'm inviting you to write your bid down. All of the proceedings of the sale will go to support POPNON, that is the national platform in Haiti of what they call themselves non-aligned peasant movement. And I will later on put on the screen before tonight. If you stay with us, and just before the session at 7 o'clock, I will give you the website that you can go to learn more about this national platform. There are scores of Haitian civic communities in all of the 10 platforms, and they have an excellent movement with an excellent manifesto. Their vision moved me. I'm sure it will move you as well. So you can investigate about the group. I will give you the website, which we just put up at the beginning of the year, and you will know what you are supporting when you bid for this painting. Now there are 4 paintings, and we're going to go for number 2, number 3, and number 4. Yes, all of them are Haitians. And in fact, if I go for my notes, I wonder if I can steal my laptop. Is it connected to anything right now? All right. This one is actually my favorite. I love the colors on this one. And again, if you're going to be bidding for this painting, if you're interested, then painting number 2, and you put in your bid what you're prepared to pay to make sure that this painting belongs to you. Bidding start at 1,000 USD, and we do have a ceiling, which is $1 trillion. So please don't go beyond that. Yeah, USD. Right? We ask you, please don't bid beyond that. And then we're going to show you. In fact, this one was an eye turner at Frame Art. The colors were really impressive to those who watched it. And let me share again a little bit about POPNON as I go along. Yes, this painting, in fact, I do remember the artist. This is a memory of one of the dances, the community dances. I think they call it a rara in Haiti. And he decided to recapture the vibrancy of this dance. It's a cultural dance. I think it has religious connotations or context. But he decided, rather than capturing the energy, to capture it visually using color. And the moment I unveiled this one at Frame Art, everybody went, "Ooh," because the colors really do tend to just take you in. And the final one is actually framed, so this will be 1,100. Yes, 1,100 we're starting the bidding at. And if you want to make sure that you get it, then you know what number you need to put down. 6,005, 10,005. What is that one that they? Yes, this one also, if I recall. And I love how they framed it. So if you are online again, the number, I see lightningflash@gmail.com on the screen. It should be in, of course, small letters. not capital letters, but that is, and it's Lightning Flash Productions. You left out Productions. Please correct that. After Flash goes Productions at gmail.com, and everything should be in lowercase. Right. And so you submit your bid to Lightning Flash Productions at gmail.com and lightningflashproductions at gmail.com, or to 876-220-1066, and know that in that very act, what you will be doing is you will be supporting the Haitian farming community in their bid to save doing what the Ministry of Agriculture should have been doing. You know, it was really terribly moving for me to recognize that farmers had to just sit by and watch indigenous crops disappearing, and markets that were once teeming, like rice. I mean, you know, I remember saying to somebody, if the Americans have their way, they would reduce Haiti to just one naked market, that if you want to drink water, you have to go and buy it from a bottled, bottled water imported. The market in Haiti, and I could tell you story after story after story of, I mean, quite apart from, the gang violence, which is horrendous enough as it is, but you also have some gangs in the government who ruthlessly misallocate the responsibility and the funds and the authority that is given to them. And so you will be making a difference, and I implore you, if you see something you like, and if you also want, if you're moved to support this movement, I ask you to give it your best bid and know that this is all going to a worthy cause.
Not below 1,000 US.
No, we're starting at 1,000. That's the floor, and please remember the ceiling, 1 trillion. Yeah, this is 1,100 for this one. Thank you. Now, so this will conclude our Caribbean in Crisis session, and we will reconvene. I know it's not quite 7 o'clock yet. It's 6:30. So we're going to take a short break, and I think we have some refreshment or some drinks or something that I know that we have not exactly been sitting in an AC area. And if there's, before we break, there may be some questions, and yes. So for any, I see Professor Lewis still here, and Professor Monroe are still here. And so any questions, if you are online with questions, could you please just simply write them into the YouTube comments? I think when we're live streaming the chat, right? And I'm going to ask that Mr. McLennan, could you check with the technician on the inside so that if any questions come up, could you relay them to us? You could just write it down on a piece of paper. But yes, Henry, you have a question?
Yes, maybe more in the sense of a provocateur.
Could you?
I've already made up my mind on this issue. No, I can say.
For the sake, yes.
For Professor Monroe, I usually like to think that those who have given sweat, blood, and tears for Jamaica, especially in public service, are perfect. And but with regards to Jamaica's independence and the role that the Right Excellency Norman Manley played. On the matter of Jamaica's sovereignty regarding, republic status, do you think we were sold out? Did it come up at all? And how was it dealt with that today, so many years after, we're still struggling to do constitutional reform and so forth?
I think, Henley, as you said, you're accustomed to be the provocateur, so I'm happy for that. The independence constitution making process was very mixed, in the sense that the negatives were quite significant, and I dealt with it at length in my book, the 1972 book on the politics of constitutional decolonization. To your question, was the Republic issue raised? Yes, it was definitely one of the proposals made from one of the very few groups, unfortunately, who had the time and the ability to make submissions to the committee. It was not considered carefully nor seriously. In fact, the record will show that Norman Manley's contribution to that process was also mixed, in the sense that he, more than anyone else, in the verbatim notes of the Constitution Making Committee, which I understand are no longer available or nobody can find them, but the 300 pages of verbatim notes, it's Norman Manley who warned that the powers being given to the Prime Minister in our version of parliamentary democracy were excessive and dangerous. It arose on a particular point, and that particular point was relating to the Prime Minister's power to cause the dissolution of Parliament. In parliamentary democratic systems, the UK or normally most other countries, if the majority who put the Prime Minister there, that is the majority of his party, wanted a new leader of that party, they could vote for a new leader, and the Parliament would continue to function. In the Jamaican case, what was written is that if the majority wanted to change Prime Minister Siaga or Prime Minister Golding or Prime Minister Portia Simpson-Miller or Prime Minister Holness or anyone else who was Prime Minister, for another leader of the party to become Prime Minister, the Prime Minister has the power, literally, to send the Parliament to capital punishment. In other words, if you vote for me to change me, go back to the polls. That is a Damocles sword that Jamaican Prime Ministers have, which doesn't exist in the UK. UK, they changed Thatcher for another Prime Minister without having to go to an election. And there are so many other examples of that. Manley warned against that, but the response from his first Vice President and from Edward Siaga, the verbatim notes are quoted in my book, was that one man must rule. The Prime Minister is in effect a dictator for 5 years. Their words, not mine. Manley, to his credit, stood up unsuccessfully against that perspective which was accepted. However, his major failing had to do with privileging speed over consultation, privileging getting the independence done quickly rather than even doing what was done in Trinidad. In Trinidad, who got independence the same year, 62, the committee published a draft constitution, what they were thinking of, so that people could respond to what the committee's thinking was. That was not done here. I mean, even going further, the Indian precedent was available that you get the colonial government to grant independence, and thereafter you have a constituent assembly where the parliament would invite others to make representations as to how the constitution should be formed. So that is where we are the problem. Not only was we having a constitution model on the British Westminster model, but the issue of a republic was given little consideration. The Prime Minister was given more power than the Prime Minister in the original model. And the fact that it is so difficult to change the substantial parts of our Constitution was again a deliberate decision. That even though it was 16 members sitting in secret, giving the public 2 weeks to make submissions, they made sure that whatever the document was that we have now could only be changed in a very elaborate process, including a referendum. So that's why we have the difficulties we have now. But within that, it was possible, and happily it has been done, that changes have been made, the most important being in 2011 under the Golden Administration, where the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms replaced the Independence Chapter 3 in our Constitution. And that has really added significant rights to the people, some of which cannot be changed, in the words of the Constitution, by any organ of the state. Prime Minister, Parliament, Police, Chief of Staff, except, in the words of the Constitution, demonstrably justified in a free and democratic state, quote unquote. So that is how, when the NIDS bill was first passed, it was possible for the courts to overrule, and that was declared null and void. So they had to go back and pass a new national identification system law, which acknowledged the rights of the people to privacy. It is also because of that clause why recently, most recently, the decision by Prime Minister Holness to grant a permit to mine the Dry Harbor Mountains to Bengal Company, in overruling the position of the regulatory body, the courts, a couple months ago, declared that decision by the Prime Minister null and void. So we do have rights now which the people can uphold, largely by going to the courts. There are other mechanisms, of course, which in a period of relative passivity are not being used, the right to petition, demonstrate, and so on. But the courts are proving to be a real bastion of the new rights, the right to a healthy and productive environment. We didn't have that in 1962. The right not to be discriminated on grounds of gender. We didn't have that in 1962. And that's there now. Some of the rights that we fought for, because I was in the Senate at the time when many of these issues were being considered, were rejected by the majority. The right for non-discrimination on grounds of language, that was not accepted. It was something that the University Department of, is that the Constitution was framed with completely inadequate consultation, participation of the Jamaican people. Proposals were made which could have been more widely discussed, but were dismissed. And we ended up with a constitution that we have to change, but it's more difficult than it would have been had there been more public participation. And that's one of the reasons why it stalled. Our National Development Plan, Vision 2030, which was one of the most widely discussed consultative issues over 2 years, spanning different administrations. That document says decolonization of our courts along with other aspects of our system. That's 2009. We're 2026, and we're still resisting the fact that the Caribbean Court of Justice should be Jamaica's final court as part of deliverables on the National Development Plan to decolonize our court system. We still have to go to the Privy Council. A bit long-winded, but I thought I'd expand a bit on your question. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I think we deserve a break. So I know that you're reminding me that some of us are more clad than others. So we need to cool down. So I think the kitchen is ready for some. Yes, so if those of you who need a cool drink, please feel free to go that way and quench your thirst. Will be reconvening for our final deliberation for the evening at 7 o'clock sharp. And we will be looking now at the future, the dream revisited, looking ahead. Thank you so much for your participation all, and we convene again at 7 o'clock.
of our Oh. Good evening again. We have come to the time now of our latter presentation, but we're going to do that by standing and doing our national anthem. Let's stand, please. Invite Mrs. Lisa Harrison, chairman of the Norman Washington Manley Foundation, to come and do the official welcome.
Thank you. On behalf of the Norman Washington Manley Foundation, I welcome you to Regardless. This toehold that Edna and Norman built is a small home that they created after the family had to sell the rest of the estate to settle debts. They called the house Regardless. Regardless of the loss, regardless of the reduced circumstances, regardless of how much had to be given up, the work continued here. It is in that vein that we welcome the conversations here this evening. This space that housed the continuation of Norman Manley's work, even after the loss of the referendum, must continue to host conversations like these. That is why the property is a National Heritage Site. That is why the Norman Manley Foundation, the Edna Manley Foundation, the Michael Manley Foundation are all committed to the preservation and development of this site. We welcome you here this evening, and we look forward to even more conversations like this. This is part of our vision for this space, and we are really excited for this to be one of the first such conversations. Thanks and welcome.
Thank you very much. Now we want to move our program into a time of greetings, and we'll be having greetings from some past prime ministers of Jamaica, starting with Mr. Patterson.
Today, the 4th of July, marks the 133rd anniversary of the birth of Norman Washington Manley, universally acknowledged as the architect of modern Jamaica and a pioneer of the movement for Caribbean integration. It is also the 250th anniversary of independence for a country whose capital is Washington, the identical middle name with our late great national hero. Few seem to remember that CARICOM Day is also the 4th of July. It was so designated by our founding fathers in Chagaramas in 1973 to salute the memory and perpetuate the legacy of one who is a proud forefather of Caribbean regionalism. Let me applaud this bold initiative of the Foundation to celebrate his birthday with a focused discourse on the eve of the 51st meeting of CARICOM heads to begin in Castries, St. Lucia. It was in 1947 at Montego Bay that Norman Manley espoused the vision of our wielding the power of diversity into a formidable force that could stand shoulder to shoulder with all other nations in the world. He believed that from the diversity of Africa, India, China, and Europe, we could weld the many strands of the world to combine in forging our own unique Caribbean civilization. At heart and by conviction as an eminent jurist, Norman Manley was first and foremost a true Democrat who believed in the inherent right of the people to choose. And so, when the referendum which he ordered took place, he accepted the verdict of the people with a grace that set the gold standard of conduct, a practice and a template which I hope current leaders will seek to emulate. He steadfastly proceeded thereafter to secure Jamaica's independence with the same meticulous care that he brought to every legal brief. For reasons best known to them, our leaders chose to depart from custom and not include the 4th in their meeting, but to do so beginning on the 5th instead. I hope they will use and benefit from the extra day to prepare for the arduous challenges which confront them. The chairman has already indicated the topics that will be on the agenda. How to ensure the meaning exercise of our sovereignty. How we in the Caribbean maintain it as a zone of peace. How we face the perils of global warming and the savagery of climate change. And also, in light of the recent decision of the United Nations and the conference in Ghana, we have to pursue the battle to win reparative justice for the greatest crime against humanity. It was my privilege to have seen the action being taken
to forge regional solidarity and to create new regional structures to exercise our collective sovereignty. This is a time when we must steadfastly pursue that course. Norman Manley envisages the Caribbean as a wider field for individual ambition. This is neither a matter for nostalgia nor a pipe dream. It demands visionary leadership, the exercise of our finest intellectual minds, and the tremendous creative energy of all our people. We have a duty and an obligation on this solemn day to commit ourselves to fulfilling the legacy of Norman Washington Manley by building a sound edifice for generations to come.
Former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson. And now we have some brief words from former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, which I'll read. Reflection on the federal experiment. Norman Manley believed passionately that Jamaica's hopes and aspirations could more successfully be pursued in union with the other English-speaking Caribbean countries rather than going it alone. It was primarily his inspiration that led to the initiation of the West Indies Federation at the Montego Bay Conference of 1947. It was formalized in 1958. What emerged was more of a confederation than a federation, in that it did not provide for an effective executive authority. It lacked a viable central government and allowed for individual countries to secede, as Jamaica subsequently did. It may not have been what Manley wanted, but it was the best that could be agreed on at the time. Federation is a daunting undertaking, requiring each country to surrender much of its autonomy to a supranational authority. How much of that autonomy is left with individual countries is a vexed and complex issue not easily resolved. How that central authority is held accountable to the people in the respective countries poses another conundrum. A federation rests on a shaky footing unless those issues are reconciled, as was shown with the separation of Bangladesh from Pakistan and Singapore from Malaysia in the former case after a bitter armed conflict. The West Indies Federation faced other difficulties. While we had a shared history of slavery and colonialism, geography was not kind to us. The distance between Jamaica and Trinidad is more than 1,000 miles, twice the distance between Jamaica and the United States. Because of this, we hardly knew each other. In 1958, and maybe even now, the vast majority of Jamaicans had never met anyone from the Eastern Caribbean, and the only things that connected us apart from our history were the UWI and the West Indies cricket team. And I'll add, the latter not so much anymore. Okay? That kind of strangerhood breeds insularity. The collapse of the West Indies Federation did not blur the recognition that as a small, underdeveloped country, notwithstanding being a sovereign state, it would be a hard slog for us to make it entirely on our own. Enter CARIFTA and then CARICOM. Through the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, specific areas of cooperation were identified and the relevant operating procedures defined. Those efforts have not been without some successes, but they have fallen far short of what had been promised. They too have been bedeviled by some of the same issues that caused the Federation to fail. Conflicts over sovereignty and autonomy, the lack of executing authority, the requirement that decisions must enjoy unanimous support, and the fact that the pace of advancement is defined by that of the tardiest member country. What is most lacking is a refreshed vision of what our collective efforts are capable of achieving for all of us, and the political will to infuse that vision into our policies, decisions, and actions. Sadly, the weaknesses in the CARICOM construct are being laid bare. The community is badly fragmented, and we are allowing ourselves to be played against each other by powerful external forces. That may well be what Norman Manley wanted to guard against. Those were comments from former Prime Minister Bruce Golding. At this time, we're going to see a clip from Rachel Manley.
He took a risk with the Federation and it did not pay off. But my grandmother's irritation was that she had told him not to. It was really heartbreaking. And then I don't think it helped when his great friend Eric made the comment, 1 from 10 leaves nothing. That hurt him profoundly. Not hurt him, offended him. The truth of it weighed on him, knowing that they couldn't do it without Jamaica. They just couldn't. And then you look at the little Eastern Caribbean doing so well with their arrangement. Of course we could have had federation. Of course we could have. We'd have been so powerful in the world. I remember I was talking to a Jamaican a PNP politician, somebody that I have a great affection and admiration for. And he was almost appalled that I still spoke of federation. He said, "You must be crazy, but you're an intelligent person. That can never happen." And I suddenly realized people really don't feel, intelligent, sensitive people really don't feel it could happen. I think it could.
Okay, friends, we have come to the time in our program where we want to move to our panel discussion. And it is my task now to introduce to you our panelists. I'm just trying to find it on my phone, and then we'll move on. Let's begin. Rupert Lewis, is he still here? He's on. Okay. So we're going to have Trevor is on the panel. Trevor, okay, we're going to read some of that. Trevor Monroe, one of Caribbean's leading public scholars, has had a distinguished record as an academic in civil society, advocacy, and in public service. Currently, the Principal Director of National Integrity Action and a member of the International Council of Transparency International, he has authored several books on the Caribbean, democratic governance, and founded the UWI Center for Leadership and Governance. As a civil society advocate, Professor Monroe was instrumental as founder or co-founder of the Citizens Action for Free and Fair Elections, CAFE, Jamaica's Election Observer Group, and the University and Allied Workers Union, UAW. Professor Monroe served in Jamaica's Senate for 10 years, championing legislation for greater transparency, accountability, and good governance. In Jamaica's 2015 National Honors, Professor Monroe was awarded the Order of Distinction Commander Class. Welcome, Professor Monroe. We also have on the panel Suniti Maharaj, who is a director of the Lloyd Best Institute of the Caribbean, a non-profit organization founded by her late husband, Lloyd Best, as an independent agency for research and public policy. Under her stewardship, the institution has networked communities of indigenous knowledge and activity, and from this has come the Caribbean Yard Campus, an initiative designed to bridge the informal and formal knowledge systems of the Caribbean. Former independent senator of Trinidad and Tobago, she has served in several capacities, including as a media consultant, a lecturer in journalism, editor of the Trinidad and Tobago Review, and group executive for editorial and content development at One Caribbean Media, editor-in-chief of the Trinidad Express, and news director of TV6 in Trinidad. Okay. Then the third panelist is Dr. Peter Morgan. Bishop Dr. Peter Morgan is a graduate of University of the West Indies and a former senior education officer in the Ministry of Education in Jamaica. He was responsible for implementing the guidance counseling program in all secondary schools in Jamaica in the 1970s, and for developing ongoing training modules for counselors. He has pursued postgraduate studies in USA with practical research in pastoral psychology and field experience in psychiatry and juvenile delinquency. Dr. Morgan is the chairman of the International Association of Kingdom Churches and Ministries. He is also a founding director of the Caribbean Israel Leadership Coalition. He's currently the co-chairman of WOLMI ICC, that's WOLMI-ICC, a United Nations accredited organization committed to the transformation of nations across the globe. He's currently the Dean of Postgraduate Studies at the Caribbean Nazarene College in Trinidad and Tobago. And to lead this discussion, we have Ambassador Byron Blake, who will be coming to you shortly. He's a chairman of the board and co-founder of Vihara Foundation. Is that how it's pronounced, sir? All right. Having served in the Jamaica ambassador to the United Nations, and as a former senior advisor to the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Byron Blake is an economist and with over 45 years experience, working at different levels in institution building, policy development and promotion, planning, program and project development and promotion in the Caribbean community, CARICOM, from 1970 to 2004. Currently, he serves as the CARICOM chair for the development, for the redevelopment of Haiti. I'm going to invite Ambassador Blake to come now and to lead us in this part of the discussions.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for setting up the meeting. I was advised by visionary and leader that my role is to just guide. But those who know me will know that that is a difficult thing for Blake to do, especially when we're talking about Caribbean integration. So, and also when we are talking about the situation and legacy of Norman Washington Manley, who I happen to have had the privilege of chairing a meeting that we had him as student to address at the Micro Teachers College, so that, you know, I have to do a little bit more than just guiding. When I was on my way here, I heard a professor, and he was speaking to the issue, especially of Norman Manley as the Federalist, but he also mentioned the Nationalist. I want to say here's a man who was, I say, a nationalist, which means Jamaica to be freed from the empire, a man who was a Federalist, which says really in the 1950s and into the 60s, if you really wanted a small state to be not only just called sovereign, but to be a sovereign which could exercise something, then you had to have a little bit more than 1 million or so person at the time, and a little bit more land space than 144 square meters, right? He was a Democrat. I suspect that to the very bone, as a result of which, you know, he believed in the will of the people. So called the referendum, didn't have to call. And when that happened, he said, well, national independence, and he called the elections. No, he knew, must have known that the probability of losing that election was extremely high. But he wanted the guidance of the people. So, as PJ, I think, mentioned, was how many of our current leaders have not just the desire for power, but the fact that you must be legitimized. You must be legitimized by the people in whatever you're doing. It's a risk, and he paid the price. But it's clearly one that he was willing to take. But our question for this session is that vision, the vision of the Caribbean as a unity, a lost vision, so to speak? And is there a way to reformulate that vision? Someone, it was Rachel, made the point that a lot of people say you cannot do it by going as a federation because too many people think that it can't work. So, but you can't have any substance just at being like a national. Hence, you know, starting with Carifta, someone mentioned, there was a movement, and people have defined it, and Professor Kenneth Hall, former governor, has said, and he has written, that one William Dimas, and I don't know who I got linked to it, one Byron Blake, were trying to introduce federation by stealth. I.e., was there a way to have these countries combine their attributes and move such that they could not only have a level of political autonomy, but also economic, and social. When we ask the question, can it move forward? The Caribbean, and this is the conundrum that we're up against now. We are respected internationally because we have 15 votes, right? But we are respected internationally if we use those 15 votes as a collective. If you use them 1-1-1-1, then you have lost the respect. So the trick is, how can you use those 15 votes, which is why people come to meetings of the CARICOM heads. I guarantee you that there are some leaders from outside of the region and international institutions who will turn up in St. Lucia tomorrow. Incidentally, PJ mentioned the fact that we're having the meeting starting a day after it's supposed to be. And last year it started a day after it was supposed to be as well. Before that, it only happened twice, and those times were explained by real circumstances. I am hoping that we are not drifting mentally from the fact that there's something that we need to rally around. So posts that we need to have as benchmark posts. But saying that as if we can recognize that we bring our attributes together, including the 15 votes, you utilize them as the 15 votes. You utilize your attributes for the production and trade, not only goods but services, and therefore you have a negotiating position in markets. That is where you stand best. But to do that, countries have to be prepared to subjugate the national instinct and the instinct to, when it gets to a hard decision, say, well, I'm still going to stay with it. You know, everybody can stay with the easy decisions. But when you get to the hard decision, which really could impact your, what you might call your national sovereignty on this particular issue, to see above the fact that this particular issue is national, but to see long term and you know that you are better off subjecting and losing out, so to speak, on this one and carrying it. So that is the trick, and therefore, one question is, do we have the kind of political leadership that can blend the people and say, well, look, we know that on this particular score, we have to, we might not, I'll say Jamaica, we might not be the greatest beneficiary, but overall, taking a long view, collaboration is best thing. When I left CARICOM in 2004, end of 2004, I was certain that we had created the framework for a single market and economy supported by the things on the education side, the things on the health side, the things on the disaster preparedness and so forth, that we had the frame. Little by little, people did not carry through on the decision, which was made, and every difficulty was ironed out and identified. But people are allowed to not follow through, and gradually, I don't even think now, even though that we are back where we were. So I say all of that to say, Manley would perhaps say that by vision in 47, it's even more relevant now, because you're at a point now in history where you have a hemispheric big north, the United States of America, which happens to be a federation of 50 states, but those states are large. The global behemoth, China, an amalgam of some 31 also administrative regions. those administrative regions are large. If we exclude Hong Kong and Macau, the smallest has a population of 7.2 million. That is half of the population of CARICOM. We include Haiti, we'll take the 15. So the smallest of those things. So we have to understand that we cannot operate really in that framework without coming together. So how do you come together and use it as those states come together and use their thing and their collectivity, and therefore able to secure their ends, sometimes very illegally. The United States secured a lot of its ends, and I have happened to sit at the opposite end of the table to them in negotiations, and you see the illegality, you see it, but they're big. So you have to. So I'm saying, how do we and can we get our leadership around this? I think this is where, at this point in CARICOM, we have to say it straight to leaders. You're going down a path which is dangerous, and not only dangerous for the Caribbean as a region, the Caribbean as a zone of peace, the Caribbean as an area where we could protect the integrity of the environment, but for you as individual countries, because once you have slipped and become somebody's, the next time around, you are weak. Nobody is going to pay you any attention, really. So, as our leaders assemble, and as we think about it, and we think of the vision of a true Democrat, someone who was willing to sacrifice his personal ambitions to try to really create a region. He thought the federal route was the route. We might question that, but the route of joining our sovereignty and maximizing the value of our sovereignty is what he really had in mind, and we have to get that across. Byron Blake, you're supposed to be just a guide. So, who do I call on first? Is it the Right Reverend Doctor? The Right Reverend Doctor? But before I call him, let me just say, Peter, let me just...
Recording in progress.
Right, let me just that was a time when church, the Caribbean Council of Churches, and especially with the CADEC.
Echo.
Through CADEC, was in the vanguard of the regional integration process. They were the ones who, for example, had a conference, economic conference, early days of Carifta, start pushing. They were a significant part of the group that established the Caribbean, what is the Caribbean Tourism Organization. About three reverends, Reverend Hatch, Robert Hatch, forget two of the others, but they were at the vanguard of creating that. I know the tourism thing, in fact, went beyond there was the CARICOM countries. So the church has always had a very important role, and I hope that they are re-stimulating that role. So, Reverend Doctor, over to you, sir.
Yes, well, I really appreciate what has been shared so far, and I appreciate your introductory statements as well. I must say that I am personally appreciative of what was shared by Professor Trevor Monroe, and also of Professor Rupert. I think that my link with Cuba makes me very much interested in what is happening, because people don't know, but I have Cuban heritage. My mother was Cuban, and I've always had a heart for Cuba and what is happening in Cuba. And then, of course, in what was shared about Haiti is very significant. My daughter is married to a Haitian, and so I've had a lot very closely related to Haiti and what's happening there. So I really appreciate all that has been shared. What the key thing that I just like to mention three very significant things, which, I'll mention them, and then of course we can expand on them as we discuss. But one of the things is that I recognize I'm a historian, and I have a good background knowledge of what has happened to us as a Caribbean people over the years. And I can just summarize and say that we are a freedom going people. We are confident as a people, and we have led the way, whether academically, in the riots of during the slave riots, in the establishment, uh, of labor unions with a falling Gavism, the movement towards self-government, and all of these kinds of things. And of course, in the rest of the Caribbean, we remember the Black Jacobins in Haiti, that created the first Black republic in in the Western Hemisphere, in fact. And who can forget more recently the Cuban Revolution, that was designed to shake off the austere imperialistic hold of the wealthy political nations, and to establish us in the Caribbean as an strong economic base. Cuba did that as an example for us. And then, of course, here we are sitting with Trevor Monroe and others like him. The short-lived socialistic idealism of people like Rodney of Guyana, Maurice Bishop from Grenada, Trevor himself from Jamaica, and so on. And I think that perhaps they didn't achieve all they wanted to achieve, and they may seem to have been defeated, but a lot was accomplished through them, and we continue to remember them. And it's in the same way that I think of Norman Manley. I was deeply affected. I was a youngster, just like Trevor was, when the Federation didn't work. And it affected me deeply. But I do not ignore the burden and the vision for the region, which was birthed, and it was strongly birthed in me. And so I think there's a heritage that we should not ignore, and I give God thanks for that. But there are two missing things that I think that I would like to present here. One is the role of the church. And one of the things that we tend to ignore, at least we don't talk about it, and we don't with it in mind, and that is that the church is undoubtedly, to my mind, the most powerful and the most resourceful organization in ocean of Jamaica and across the Caribbean. We have the practical skills, we have the moral integrity, and we have the population of spiritual people who can provide the kind of communities that will transform townships and possess cities and govern nations. In our churches, amongst the members, there are accomplished politicians, there are judges, jurists, sociologists, educators, economists, lawyers, engineers, architects, everybody, psychologists, educators, then the artists and the media experts. They're all there in the church. One of the things that we have to challenge the church about, and that's part of my job, is for them not to think that they exist for themselves, but rather that they exist in order to determine the, the quality of life that we live, and they must have an influence in the political sphere, in the leadership, in the professional fields, in the service industries, and they must play a role. That is the mandate that was left for the church to disciple nations and to become the presence of the power of spiritual authority that Christ represented in what I regard as his role in his time, and certainly in the first century, where we saw a quiet revolution that took place. And that has happened in history. We can trace that from time to time. So, my role is to challenge the church to produce men and women who can be, as we are told to be, the salt in the earth, to be the light to the world, and to be the yeast in the dough, and to plant the kind of seeds, to invest, to create the kind of harvest that we want. And I think that that is a challenge that the church really has to pick up and to carry out. Now, it's been happening. And I think that we are in a season today when, although the church has tended to become religious, withdrawn, escapist in their thinking, separated from the state, yet now I think that there is a whole movement, and I'm part of that movement. I think that what we're doing here is part of that movement as well. I have been involved in the International Third World Leaders Association. I've been involved in movements in Guyana, in Trinidad, in Barbados, in which the church has exercised some responsibility in seeking to influence their governments. But the third thing I just want to mention is that we don't really have a choice in the Caribbean about coming together. CARICOM is a good example, then they're trying, but I think that, we need to go far beyond what CARICOM is attempting and what they are doing. My view that the West, the Western Hemisphere, which is claimed, they protect it, they act as if the West belongs to them, and we understand why they would think that way. But I think today it is necessary, if we are going to restore the concept and the necessity for regional integration, we don't have a choice, because we have to. Do you realize that the Caribbean region is not just made up of CARICOM states, 15 nations, islands? No, the Caribbean region is a broad region that touches the South America. We are talking about, Venezuela, we're talking about Colombia, we're talking about the territories in Central America that are Caribbean, have Caribbean links. You know, we're talking about the ocean economy. We're talking about, you know, what we can do and become as a people together. If we don't do that, then America will continue to treat us like sycophants and to treat us in a imperialistic way and so on. We can become as powerful as the North American continent, as powerful as the South American continent, if you ever stop and consider the wealth, resources, the geosphere, the population of the whole Caribbean, which includes the Cuba and Haiti and Dominican Republic and the Virgin Islands and of course Central American countries, you know, and so on. That's how we can restore Caribbean unity and become as powerful a body, security-wise, economically wise, intellectually wise, politically wise, and so on. I think there's a lot that we can do, and I would love to see us take some initiative in this way. I am part of movements that are pulling together professionals, diplomats, and so on, leaders in the Caribbean region who must establish the entire Caribbean as a protector and a keeper of the West. And then we can talk with the United States, support them in what they're doing in that regard, and not become an imperialist dog, so to speak, you know, or an underdog. We can be as powerful economically, socially, educationally, academically as the United States. So I just wanted to say those things. We can discuss around that, and perhaps Trevor and others can put their piece in there as well.
And the demonstration, one of the best demonstrations of the capacity of the churches came out after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, where
Yes.
in no time, churches, no, I'm using churches mobilized and had all kinds of programs. But I use churches because they were doing it individually. I remember Paul Miller of United Church. He had started a process to try and pull it together and say, no, let us not go one by one, let us go as a group. And then, of course, Paul died, and that was the end of the effort. So, Bishop, you have one further challenge, which is to get the church to work in these vineyards as church and not as churches. So that is a challenge which I'm throwing out to you. But I say that as a way of directing to my other panelists. I have two panelists to come. But if you know me, my vote has to go in favor of the lady first. Sorry, Trevor. My vote has to go in favor of the lady first. So, look, I did a lot of work with your late husband from CARICOM on Caribbean economics, Caribbean integration, and so forth. So I now want to pull you in for your comments, and then I'll come back at home to Trevor. Are you set up for? Are you set up for?
Yes. Are you there?
Yeah, yes, I'm here.
Yes, are you hearing?
Yeah, I'm hearing. I'm training a little bit to hear the Zoom, but I'm hearing. Mhm. Oh, sure. Well, I'd like to start off by thanking you for inviting me to join this panel. Or everything I've heard from the previous speakers really are consistent with people with a deep passion and commitment and to this project of the Caribbean. There's great value in having this event being broadcast from, yes, what a timely call, yeah. To have it being broadcast from, streamed from regardless. Sorry. Somebody is trying to get me on WhatsApp and I. That's up on the computer, yes. Because this is a time when our ethos really has to be one of regardless. We are under pressure regardless. The climate, the Mother Nature is acting up regardless. We do not have the leaders to meet this moment regardless. And this is where the people of the Caribbean have to stand in the breach, carry the purpose and carry the project and raise their voices. I have no doubt that there are many more people that support this project of a united and integrated Caribbean, a Caribbean that realizes its power and potential, its capacity to teach the world something about the creation of a world of many, of diversity, of historic knowledge, of ancient knowledges, current, modern, of something special and unique, something with a capacity, imaginative capacity to create new economies, a new way of relating between labor and capital. All of these things are what reside here. And this is a moment, I think Professor Monroe or someone, I don't know if it was Rupert, talked about in the past 40 years. 40 years is no time in the life of a civilization. It is stressful for those of us who have to live in that particular period. But regardless, we are here. And regardless as a location, and Manley was so smart to use that term, that word, because it means you carry on regardless. And it's a place where a dream is regardless, but it is not the only place in the Caribbean. You traverse the Caribbean and you meet so many people who are, laboring in the vineyards. They are working hard. They are looking after those who are not looked after. They're building dreams. And no investment is coming into it, but they are building nonetheless. And there's a whole Caribbean out there. I think the point was raised. I think going back to Norman Manley, that video that was played is an interview that I did last year, and I used excerpts on it in launching my online podcast on exactly July 4th, because it was his birthday, because it is CARICOM Day, and because anyone I asked, tell me what happened on July 4th. They say, oh, American independence. So the day when our children can say to us, July 4th, when they can answer that question with, today is CARICOM Day, today is the birthday of Norman Washington Manley, I think we would have opened that door into the future that we dream of. Unfortunately, there is no Caribbean entity, and I'm not talking about business, I'm talking about institutional CARICOM interests that were even interested. And today we see where the day is completely overlooked. It could have been a day scheduled as a start. Why? Is it because it's Saturday? What's the problem with Saturday or Sunday? So the value that we put into the symbols that have mystical power, that should have mystical power for us, are not recognized. But regardless, we carry on. And so this is a time of, always a time of opportunity. This is a moment it is common knowledge that the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago is at odds with her colleagues on several critical issues. And these are issues of sovereignty, very deep issues of sovereignty. But I have a very clear sense of a majority of Trinidadians and Tobagoans being clear that they are not about to leave CARICOM, that they support CARICOM. They may not be vociferous because they may not think it serious. They may not think her word serious enough to merit, because it just sounds like so much of what we in Trinidad call gambage, we'll talk. And we do not see, and I'm not talking about the business class that has investments in other islands and those. They do not see a Caribbean in which they are apart from, but a part of. And so we sometimes live in a world where we are so cloistered in our little silos, and we think that's the world, but we need to step out. I want to go back to, I want to draw a line from the question, the point that was raised by Professor Monroe about the need for political engagement, to have one's mandate as a politician and as a government that comes from the people, because that is at the heart of all the failures, where the implementation deficit that we often talk about with CARICOM is precisely because of that lack of engagement and the lack of a mandate from the people by our leaders when they go to CARICOM. They do not engage the issues. And so it's quite easy to go to CARICOM and agree to all kinds of things, but many things have to go before your parliament. And so they don't dare come back and say, I have agreed to so and so. And why don't they dare? Because there's not enough of a conversation to get buy-in, to have the time to explain for not just governments, but for the other interests, for people to become more engaged in taking responsibility for their countries and their future. And that is why it was so easy to derail the Federation in the first place. It is not often noticed that Eric Williams had squeaked through in 1956 in becoming Premier of Trinidad and Tobago. There was 24 seats and he won, and he got 13 in the election, but not enough to govern in a 31-member unicameral assembly. He needed 15 or 16. And so it's 15, I think. And he had to go and get the British over the head of the governor to agree that 2 of the governor's picks, the government should be allowed to pick them so that when he has a vote in the assembly, he can. If you've got an election in 56 on those terms, it's very hard for you to decide, well, I think I will go and run in the federal parliament, or I'll take the prime ministership for that. Because what happened to Grantley Adams when he accepted that leadership position, he lost the party at home. Because federal versus the national, the dynamics were not sufficiently developed to not create that problem of national versus federal. And why? It was because the rush job. We were quickly getting the decolonization process was moving apace. There was, a great momentum, do this thing quickly, not just on our side, on the side of England, which had its own economic problems at the time. And so the challenge of carrying people with you into power and having your mandate consistent is a political challenge that continues not to be met to this day. And so when you don't have people power that not just riling up people that the populists are doing, which is to a great extent the exploitation of ignorance, right? When you don't have that, when you cannot achieve what Norman Manley thought he could, which is a rational conversation in which we all understand our interests and we negotiate our interests to a compromise, and we know what is there for us if we commit to something that will cost us today, but bring rewards in the medium to long term. When we could put off that, reward and understand that it is there, if we do not develop a political culture, if we do not develop societies, if we can't do that, and if we're constantly taking shortcuts, then we will always be where we are. The problem is that the system rewards those shortcuts because the decolonization process has not pierced the political system. The same colonial system, when you get in there, our best leaders get in there, and then they find you can't carry forward the things you promised with the ethos that you promised, because the government is a going concern, and you just have to constrict and try to work this thing and hope to win the next election, and you can't. And change, transformation is a harder process, and you have to buy people, and I say win people for that. And until we do that, and until people can find the reasons, because they feel valued, because they know what they say counts, that they're not going to be deemed the enemy because they disagree, that they're not going to be marginalized because they winner take all. So the political system remains untransformed. The economic system, we're still running the same economy, exploitation of what we have, whether it's sun, sea, or sand, oil, gas, bauxite, whatever. In fact, we're almost seeing a kind of denationalization process that's going on, because we're almost getting back to that, of at least in Trinidad. So the economy still, this is a different society. Ours is a society of the larger number of people want to be able, not necessarily to work with the government, not to be working for a corporation. They want an economic structure that utilizes their products, their services. We need to have government. Government is the biggest buyer and seller of services. We want the government to be committed to small business, medium-sized business, quotas, those kinds of things that you could move from cottage to small to medium, build. Why are you importing so many things that you could buy here? What is happening with the consumption patterns? What investment is being made in transformation, and so on? But at the heart of all of this, this is my view, it is the education system. The education system, by the time people get to the point of playing a role, their knowledge base has already been set. The education system is telling us what is valid and what is not valid, what to leave at the door and what is legitimate. Whoever sets the exams are the persons who determine what is important and what is not. And so it's so much of what was necessary and is imperative for independence has not yet taken place. And so it is not, the problem is not leaders. I am aware that several cohorts of leaders have done a really good job. But the problem with depending on the leaders is that when they change, the risk comes with the next cohort and they undermine everything that you've done. It has to be anchored in the people. And so if governments are not doing it, it is for organizations and institutions like ours, civic organizations, people organizations, churches, stand in the breach. And we have to take that responsibility and grow that understanding and awareness. And to the point where people are confident enough not to just follow the leader, but to instruct the leader. And we have to be able to reach out across the sea. We have to reach each other. We have to build networks where the Lloyd Best Institute of the Caribbean has partners elsewhere where we can, we do have that, as somebody mentioned, the other entity that we have, which is the Caribbean Yard Campus. You set up your own network and you find people who are, they are doing relevant education. It's not just indigenous, but indigenous happens to be relevant because it is people doing what the environment tells them they need to do. How do you prevent floods? What kind of plants grow here? Which one has medicine? Which one has medicinal properties? The language, the validation of the dialects, that's the kind of work that we're also involved in. Though the networks of support, I also want to, before I close, mention, I think I am sensing a dynamic in the region that it may be shifting a little bit south of the Caribbean, in the south of the Caribbean. It may be one of the things that are propelled. To everything, to every action, there is a reaction, and maybe the U.S., the Dunro doctrine has put our hackers up. We are seeing that clear and present danger, as they put it, and they may have, the U.S. may have ironically activated the southern part of the Caribbean with their intervention in Venezuela. Things very often, people forget their own mandates, and things happen that force. It's like a renewal of marriage vows, Something happens and you suddenly realize, I have to get out of my complacency, because staying complacent, that's the end. And it activates us. So I see this as a moment of challenge that brings out the best in us, that reminds us of the priority of integration. So I think I'll just pause there for now, if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Sister Suniti, and for carrying on the work of your late husband. And as you said, what he would have said, this is a time for action irregardless. So it is that time. Brother Trevor, can you now wind us up, sir?
Can I say first of all that it's not working? Yeah. Can I say first of all, Brother Byron, that winding up is very easy given the quality of the comments by colleague panelist Peter and my colleague independent senator from Trinidad and Tobago, a longtime friend. And in that context, let me first of all correct that I'm no longer the principal director of National Integrity Action, because leaders have to know when to pass the baton. I'm the founding director, and the principal director is now Dr. Gavin Myers, and he is carrying forward the work quite effectively. But listening to colleague panelists, as well as the location where we are, regardless, I cannot but help remember the wisdom and advice of my supervisor of my master's thesis, which was the late Professor Rex Nettleford. It was a day after my first public demonstration among students at UWI from all the other territories. The day after that demonstration in 1964, when all of us students from the Caribbean stood with the workers at the television station, who were in our view dismissed without cause. And Rex, after reviewing the chapter of my thesis and giving me comments as to how to revise and reform it, said to me, Trevor, I admire the passion and the enthusiasm of you and other Caribbean students manifested in the demonstration yesterday. But may I remind you of one thing. Changing Jamaica, changing the Caribbean is a marathon. And please recall that in all the athletic meets regionally, Olympics, we have never medaled above 1,500 meters. So please, you have to learn this is a marathon, and you're not going to be going around in circles, but you will see marks along the way to show that there has been a road covered, but there's also more to be covered. And that is what has remained with me from that first demonstration 62 years ago, so that today I can be thankful to the Caribbean Leadership Christian Networks and the Norman Manley Foundation for initiating what I believe is likely to be a really important initiative, really important movement. Why do I say so? Because the people have to hold the leaders to account. They have to instruct, to use my friend from Trinidad's words, but they also have to constrain, instruct them and constrain them, and that requires the building of public awareness. And the building of public awareness to hold leaders to account and to do what Byron said, which is to make them understand that subjugating what appears to be national interest to serve a broader regional context, which includes us, to do that is going to require civil society organizations, non-governmental bodies, to play a much bigger role than we have done so far. We're beginning, but more needs to be done. It's going to require the Caribbean Leadership Christian Network, the Norman Manley Foundation, National Integrity Action as a governance body, to find common cause with our regional counterparts. And not just the churches, not just the governance bodies, but the professional associations, the bar. Recently, as a signal of some of the beginnings of a new feeling, a new urgency, I had the honor to be invited to be the keynote address at the Caribbean Association of Judicial Officers. That's the judges across the region. I had the opportunity to go to Trinidad and to be the keynote speaker at the recent Trinidad and Tobago Transparency International Congress, to Guyana, the similar body, to do a presentation for the Parliamentary Reform Commission in Barbados. So each of us in our own way have to link and strengthen the connection with like-minded bodies across the region. And we have to do that to build the public awareness so that leaders don't feel free to do as they wish in respect of the critical urgency of Caribbean integration and Caribbean common action. I can think the Caribbean, there's a Commonwealth Caribbean Conference of Integrity Commissions and anti-corruption bodies that meets regularly, again a good sign. So that we need to do more of what has begun. Regionalize the bodies and engage them more in building public awareness. Connected to that, I would say, is the need to use the current issues, the disappearance of the old world, imperfect as it was rule-governed, imperfect as it was, to a multilateral system that has not yet taken shape, but we are in the process of engaging it. We need to explain this to our people, what their stand should be on demands that are being made on each of us, and hopefully the powers that be expect that we be separate and divided in our responses. The most recent manifestation of this, of course, is the Third Country National Agreements, the TCN. which the United States has sought to negotiate separately with our respective territories. We need to say to our governments collectively that our people need to be informed of what is in those agreements. We cannot be kept in ignorance. And I'm encouraged by the fact that I saw a news item a few days ago that the leaders in the Eastern Caribbean states were meeting together to develop a common perspective in respect of further demands by the United States on this particular issue. So we need to be better integrated, or people need to be better informed. We have a critical role to play, and we need to play that role more effectively. And this, I suggest, this symposium is an excellent renewal of the kind of common perspective that many of us as University of the West Indies students, UWI has to play a big role, or media, Caribbean Association of Journalists, to play a big role in the issue of public awareness building, strengthening the people's capacity to constrain irresponsible leaders and to instruct them. That is one of the main lessons that we should learn from the fact that when the people were consulted in Jamaica, in September of 1961, they took a decision which set us back but has not defeated us. And one of the reasons that they took that decision was that they were insufficiently informed. Public awareness building was not what it should be. And today, that deficit has to be corrected. And in so doing, strengthen our ability to survive, because closer integration is now a matter of survival, even more so than a matter of growth, development, and prosperity. We need to get together to survive. And in so doing, look for our allies beyond the traditional, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. What are the extent of our agreements? Our people need to understand why it's so important not to ditch or abandon old relationships, but to develop new ones that can serve our interests and the people's interests, their living standards, more effectively than is being done now. So I thank you again, Lisa, for the role of the Norman Manley Foundation in bringing us together, and Kenge from the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network. Let this be a beginning, a resuscitation of awareness building amongst our people so that they can play the role of instructing leaders and not only saying how high when the leaders say jump. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President. Of course, I understand the commander wants to pull things together and to wrap it up. I'm going to give him a chance to do that, but I also want to think that we are beyond our time. That, you know, the brain power gathered here, we might want to hear a little bit more, but I pass it over to you, Visionary and Commander.
I think I missed. Okay. Thank you, Ambassador. But we're just about at the 8:30 mark. I want to allow for, though, I know that the four presenters have presented, but I quickly want to say personally, each time we have these conversations, I find myself building relationships, and those working relationships keep ever expanding. And particularly, Sonity, let me really say, I am I was listening to you deeply. I know I need to hear a lot more about campus yard campus. How is it again? I'm not hearing. I think you're muted. Sanity, are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
I'm hearing.
It's campus yard vibes. That's
Caribbean
right.
Yard Campus. Caribbean Yard Campus.
Caribbean Yard Campus. The person who connected us, Charlene, has been telling me quite a lot about it, and I'd love to get the opportunity. There are many resonances that I heard in talking with you, and I'm looking forward to a continued relationship. And the next time I'm that side of the Caribbean, I know that we need to connect. But thank you, all our speakers, Bishop Morgan. I almost said Bishop Monroe. I was from prophet to bishop. Yes, Professor Monroe and Ambassador Blake. And I also, of course, want to acknowledge those who have contributed and are not here now. Professor Lewis and Her Excellency Lopez LaRocque. This has been, I can't just say a rich gathering. It has been a conversation that has been deeply inviting something. So I certainly heard on my part, Lisa, that this is a kind of an encouragement for the future. And I want to deeply thank everyone who has stuck. I was so surprised. I expected more people to come to the later session and the earlier sessions. So this has taken me kind of by surprise. But I'm very thankful to all who have participated, who have contributed, those online and those who will also be looking at this later. All our conversations at the Caribbean, at CCLN, we archive, and I know that Dennis will be getting this video from you and we'll be putting it up on our channel at Caribbean Christian Leadership Network. I want to thank very much also I'm not sure I'm getting you, Shelley, but you are the next person that I was going to thank, the staff of the Norman Manley Association. Pictures? Okay. I'm thanking everybody who has contributed. Of course, our usual live streaming person, Dennis. I want to especially mention, of course, the staff here, Melva, who has worked assiduously to make sure that everything was all together here. I want to thank also my crew, Mr. Lloyd McLennan and Kwame McLennan, who are always, I can always call upon when I know that I need some assistance. Thank you all for participating, and listen out, we'll be in your space again soon. Thanks all, and have a very good rest of the evening.
Good to see you, boy. Thank you here.
Yeah, man. Stop, man.